Welcome, one and all, to another episode of the Brothers Mahoney. Naturally, as you might imagine, we are the Brothers Mahoney. I'm Michael.
And I am James.
And today we are discussing the first episode of the Doctor Who revival, being Rose, written by Russell T Davies and first airing in the 26th of March 2005, at least in the UK. In the USA, when the first season of Doctor Who revival was airing on Sci-Fi, the Sci-Fi channel, and apparently it aired almost about a year later. I know that both James and I watched it when it first aired, but I don't have much recollection beyond that. It's hard to imagine that we waited like a year to watch it after we knew it came out in the UK, but I guess what other choices we have?
Yeah, we were young then, so I doubt the idea of watching it in other ways even came to our mind. I know our father, as far as I know, wasn't exactly into that subsection of the internet. So I doubt I'm sure he knew about it. I'm sure we called it the night the first aired in the US, but I guess we just got to enjoy it a year later, I guess.
It's interesting to think about, though, because, of course, this is back in 2005. Obviously, Facebook wasn't really a thing that the general public was using. I'm assuming MySpace was active, but we didn't have a MySpace in 2005, I don't think. No, we would have been like 12 or so, or 11, actually, when this came out. So the social media that we know of today did not, obviously, Twitter wasn't a thing either, I would imagine. So the social media we have today did not exist back then, so it's sort of interesting. Which I can imagine, by the way, streaming with a dial-up connection would have been atrocious.
Oh yeah, that's true. I didn't even think about the internet. I forget when exactly things started getting better and when dial-up stopped to really being the main thing. I would think it would be around 2005, 2006.
Yeah,
certainly around there.
I do know that we as a family got high-speed internet somewhat later than some other people. And there was an amazing transition, but I can't remember exactly when that would have been.
Yeah, I have no recollections of when it would have been either.
But I guess the main point being, I know that we saw this the night it aired in the USA, because as we mentioned in the intro, our father was quite a big fan of classic Doctor Who, so he was excited, of course, when the revival was announced and it came back. And naturally, Rose is the first episode. The plot is as followed, and by as followed, I mean I'm just reading this online. It's not my amazing wordsmithing abilities you are about to hear. When ordinary shop worker Rose Tyler meets a mysterious stranger called the Doctor, she is drawn into a strange and dangerous world. Her life will never be the same again. What's interesting about this episode, which I'm guessing many people have seen, is that it sort of follows the POV of Rose, who of course becomes a companion of the Doctor by the end of the episode. And so it's an interesting, and it makes sense because obviously this is the first time Doctor Who has aired on TV since 1996. Well, let me rephrase, new Doctor Who material has aired on TV since 1996. So trying to pull in a potentially new audience. So you have to, I guess, slowly guide them into the story. And there's actually other things in this episode that sort of do the same thing, which we will talk about. Yeah, but the story is a pretty simple one. There's an alien threat to the world caused by the Outans. The Outans, of course,
not named in the story.
I was going to say that I don't think they're even name dropped in the story. The Lasting Consciousness was name dropped, but the Outans weren't, though they were mentioned in the credits. And of course, the Outans, if people have a classic memory of Doctor Who, appeared in two Doctor Who stories, being Spearhead from Space, which is the first John Portee story, and then also Terror of the Outans, which was another John Portee story, and the first appearance of the Master.
Another interesting fact is that the Outans had just appeared a year previously, from 2005, in the 2004 novel starring the Sixth Doctor and Perry. This was a BBC Past Doctor Adventures novel, and it was Since the Sapiens TM, which is fascinating. Like, apparently they were on somebody's mind. I'm assuming Russell T Davies wrote this episode, right? You saw that earlier, I believe.
Indeed, he did.
Yeah, so I guess he probably wasn't reading this book. This book was written by Craig Hinton. I don't recognize him. I've never read any of the BBC past Doctor Adventure novels. The covers are a bit dicey, but they work.
And let's not be modest. We've not read any of the Doctor Who novels of any sort.
Okay, that's true. I'm just saying. I think it's interesting that the Outans appear just before, even though they only appear 2 times in the classic series, they just happen to appear 1 year before the revival, and were the very first thing from Doctor Who brought back to the current day, following a long tradition from the very popular Daleks to Cybermen to the Master to lesser known species such as the Makra, the Sea Devils, and etc. I think it's just interesting the ones they decide to bring back.
Yeah, and I wonder if it was somewhat intentional, if it's supposed to sort of allude to John Porteous' first story. Because it's an alien invasion, but it feels a lot more local in nature.
Yeah, it feels partly local because, I mean, this one, the Doctor's going it alone. Of course, this is a spoilers podcast. We've seen all of NuWho, so we'll just say this. I mean, the Doctor basically just got done fighting the Time War with his War Doctor incarnation. So he's not involved in unit right now. He doesn't really chum around with people. He just goes and does his own thing currently, which is partly why it feels so localized. He's, he doesn't have anybody backing him up and helping him.
Yeah, and I do think Rose is a pretty good choice to be a companion to, I guess, bring him back to humanity, such as human as a Time Lord can be. I think it's interesting though, seeing, following the perspective of Rose. She's just doing her day job. Then because of an incident with the Doctor, her workplace gets blown up. She just goes home to this flat she lives in with her mother, of course being Jackie Tyler, played by Camille Coduri, who's just a extraordinarily fun actress.
Yeah, she's a great actress.
She has personality to her.
Yeah, I know she pops up in some audio dramas at some point. As we said in one of our last episodes, we've only listened to 2 audio dramas, and certainly none in the more recent era. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more of her in the future.
Yeah, and I do think that Jack is quite a bit more of an interesting character than Rose's boyfriend, being Mickey Smith, who, I mean, honestly, the episode doesn't give him that much to do, but aside from being sort of pathetic.
I mean, pathetic, but in a reasonable way. I mean, no one normal right out is going to just, if an alien thing happened, I think most people's reactions would be more akin to Mickey's than they would be Rose's. I mean, hypothetically. It depends on exactly which actions we're talking about, I guess, but on the whole, I do think people would try and throw how Mickey dealt with things.
I watched some of them used toward the end when they're encountering the nasty consciousness. And Mickey is sort of being held captive. A doppelganger of plastic was made. And side note, if you're wondering, plastic, the nasty consciousness can sort of control plastic. The Outans are like plastic store dummy type things.
Although I have to admit, I have never quite understood that, because they have the guns in their hand.
That's the exact same question I had. Did it somehow get those store dummies created with the guns already in them, or when it takes them over, does it sort of somehow mentally insert the guns into them? I'm not quite sure how that works either, but I had the exact same question.
I wonder if it's something that came up inspired from space, or maybe Terror of the Outans.
Or maybe the Outan trilogy.
Maybe. It could have come up somewhere and we don't know, which is always possible. I guess I could have skimmed the Outan TARDIS wiki page before starting this. But to be fair, it is a episode discussion, and it did come up in the episode. So yeah, it's fair game for us to question that.
And my main point being that Mickey was sort of doppelganger was made of him. He's sort of carrying next to the nasty consciousness. He's not chained down or anything. He's just there. Now, I imagine the nasty consciousness told him he couldn't go, but it didn't seem like he was particularly trapped. I mean, he could have tried. Maybe he did, but if he did, it was off screen. But we just see toward the end Rose going to him. He's not tied down or anything. I just found it fun. He's just too afraid to actually go into action.
I found it pretty amusing too, and I also love the ending when the Doctor invites Rose to travel with him, and Mickey's immediate reaction is I think he's on his knees at the point, just hugs Rose's legs. It's not his finest outing. I mean, He really grows as a character, but that is not the most auspicious beginnings of a character. But
Yeah,
that's what character growth is for.
I mean, even from the beginning, Mickey's relationship with Rose, he just doesn't seem like a particularly. I guess we don't see that many scenes with him, so it might be difficult to judge him. But just, after her workplace gets blown up, she wants to take her out to the pub, but mostly because there's a football game on. And yeah, so
I mean, that's true. He did seem genuinely worried about her, though. I mean, they were. I guess this is probably answered something
I don't know.
else.
Like, it seems like he was more concerned about catching the end of the football game than he was worried about her.
Well,
I guess he did leave the game.
Well, once he found out she was alright, then he reverted back to being more normal. But he did come to make sure she was alright. I mean, it's not like he just called on the phone, "Hey, how are you, babe, honey?"
But just remember that the event Rose went through aged her. It's kind of like an old Bible.
She had great lines in this.
Yeah, which might be one of my favorite Jackie lines.
At least in this episode.
Indeed.
So yes, as Michael said, we've been following Rose throughout her just normal day life at this point. And at the end of her work shift, she needs to quickly go delay for the lottery money or something like that to someone in the basement. And she runs across all of these creepy, and it was creepy, these walking store dummies who, they move subtly at first and then they start walking toward her. And, she, thought they were, just mucking about. They're just college students playing a prank. But none of them said anything. And, they back up against a wall. And then we have the first appearance of the Ninth Doctor. What were the words he said? Well, not really words, I guess. It was just one word, run, which is a nice introduction. The Doctor saves Rose, and right as she's parting ways with him at the door, right before he goes to blow up I believe it was a transmitter or a smaller transmitter. Some sci-fi tomes get lost in my mind, even not too long after airing, because I'm not the hugest sci-fi person besides Doctor Who. So he asks her name. She, of course, replies Rose. And the Doctor, in great Christopher Eccleston form, says, "Nice to meet you, Rose. I'm the Doctor. Run for your life." And she runs off. Then the workplace that she's probably worked at now for at least a year, I guess, explodes, which is, I imagine how a lot of us would like to feel about workplaces sometimes.
And I think my favorite thing about that scene, not only is it a pretty good introduction to the Doctor, who, of course, like I said, this is the first time we've seen the Doctor new material on screen since 1996. But he has such a almost manic might be the right word, but he seems so happy. Nice to meet you, Rose. Run for your life.
Yeah, he has a great smile. Of course, it's striking. He's very plainly dressed, but he's a very intense individual.
He does a really good Doctor. He doesn't have that much time to work with the character, at least on screen, because he only has, of course, one season. But I do think he does a pretty good Doctor.
Yeah, in this episode, the main important part you get from him is his conversations with Rose. Mostly the conversation outside her flat when she's questioning him. And then near the end, right before they go and confront the nasty consciousness, where Rose is having another conversation with the Doctor. And, we just get some of his perspective on how he is feeling right now about the planet Earth. Obviously, this Doctor's going through something. We don't know what, but he's not exactly the fan of humanity. Well, kind of fan. I guess the third Doctor did get a bit snippy about it. But he's not in the most pro-human mood right now.
Yeah, referring to humans as, quote, stupid apes. I mean, he still saves them. But
yeah, he saves them.
But his attitude is a bit more less than generous than we might have seen from previous Doctors. And not just that, but also a bit more angry.
Oh, could you imagine Peter Davison calling humanity stupid apes? Do you think that would even cross his mind, let alone come from his lips?
No, no. I can sort of see William Hartnell thinking it before he really went on adventures back in his
I could see Hartnell
time.
Thinking this. I could see the third Doctor phrasing it in a more eloquent way, as the third Doctor was.
Yeah, but probably only talking about the military people, not even normal, everyday.
Almost certainly not just civilians.
And I'm not even sure if Sylvester McCoy thought about an individual human before.
Yeah, Sylvester McCoy, he had other thoughts to worry about.
Like, Colin Baker was arrogant, but I don't know if he was ever particularly bitter.
Yeah, he was like personally arrogant. He would have said it to perhaps an individual, but he would have. I don't think he would have said that about the entire species.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting personality shift for the Doctor. I do wonder what longtime fans of Doctor Who thought when they watched this new incarnation, and I especially because, of course, the first series drops a lot of hints and stuff to the reason why maybe his personality changed. So it has to do with a giant time war, and all that is sort of drip fed to us throughout. This season, but then we don't even get like a full answer until what season.
We're talking about a full answer to what the entire time war.
Yeah, like that.
Because I don't know if such a thing exists, but I guess there's the Day of the Doctor.
Yeah,
where we see the Axios start of the regeneration from the War Doctor into the Ninth Doctor. Because for a long time, I guess up until the end of the Name of the Doctor, I believe most of us had assumed that the Eighth Doctor fought in the time war that we had learned about throughout the first series of the revival. And then at the end of that war, he regenerated into the Ninth Doctor. And I think that would have been a quite fair assumption. And then it turns out there's a whole other regeneration in between, which I think could complicate people who won't pay the closest attention. But I think it's a pretty fair addition. I like it.
Yeah, and there might be some people, no, I do not think there will be that many people, but there might be some people who thought maybe there was a regeneration in between McGann and Eccleston. Maybe it was Richard E. Grant, of course, because Grant was the Doctor, or voiced the Doctor, in the Flash animated Scream of the Shauka, which was released back in late 2003, which is unfortunately, as far as like the main Doctor Who canon, it's not canon anymore. But there has been some material, like books and such, short stories written with the Richard E. Grant Doctor, which I do think is interesting.
Yeah, I haven't seen, and neither of us have seen Scream of the Saga, but it is interesting to note that David Tennant, who of course later placed the 10th Doctor, and at this point the 14th Doctor, he voices somebody in that animated story. I'm not sure that they're a big character, but it's interesting to know that David Tennant was involved with Doctor Who even back, technically before the revival came back.
Which I would imagine means he was even extra excited to get the role of actually playing the Doctor. James and I were actually talking about this yesterday, just how ingrained Doctor Who is in British society. Like getting a role on Doctor Who has to be, I imagine, for any theatre performer or any actor in the UK, has to be I would imagine has to be such a great feeling. Like even if it's a smaller role, or even if the pay is particularly great, which for the classic series it wasn't, I have to imagine it's like almost like a rite of passage.
Yeah, especially, the show is almost 60 years old now. It's part of British cultural osmosis. You grow up in the acting circles. You do stage plays. You want to go to a drama school. Like you're going to probably pop up in Doctor Who at some point. It's interesting. If you compare it to Game of Thrones, there's so many actors from Game of Thrones who have also appeared in the revival of Doctor Who. There have even been some who appeared in Classic Who, some of the older actors. It is true that the UK is a smaller population than the United States, so maybe that's why there seems to be so much crossover when it comes to not higher forms, but more popular British media. But I just find it fascinating that there's so much crossover between the two. Well, Scream of the Saga is solely a very interesting piece of Doctor Who history. Alas, with the Christopher Eccleston regeneration, and eventually with learning about the War Doctor, played by John Hurt, of course, it's just no longer canon in Doctor Who history.
And what's interesting on a closely related topic, there is a scene when the Doctor goes to Jackie and Rose's flat in which he takes a quick glance in the mirror and he sort of not criticizes, but says, "Oh, it could have been worse," looking at his face, which is a scene that's caused, I don't want to say a lot of controversy because I don't think it's necessarily been a lot of controversy, but it has caused some discussion as to exactly when whoever the previous Doctor was, when they regenerated into Christopher Eccleston.
Well, it's interesting to note that obviously the episode doesn't want you to think that it just happened because, we meet Clive, his name was. We meet Clive, who has, 3 or 4 pictures of the ninth incarnation of the Doctor in various places throughout history. Now, yes, he's a time traveler. That could have all happened the same day. And of course it could have. In the Doctor's timeline, anyway.
Although usually when the Doctor regenerates, he's laid up for like at least 6-7
well,
hours.
usually, but then we see Matt Smith. Matt Smith was like took it pretty well. So
aside from throwing plates outside.
Yes, this is true. I do quite enjoy the 11th hour. It might actually be one of my favorite regeneration episodes. But I mean, even besides those pictures from Clive, of course, Doctor Who is has an evolving canon. The longer Doctor Who goes on, the more that spaces are filled in. So there's actually been a lot of stories filled in the space between the War Doctor and this episode with Rose. So there is the Ninth Doctor Chronicles, which started in 2017. I believe that these were audio dramas from, of course, Big Finish. So in these, the Ninth Doctor is voiced by Nicholas Briggs, a long-time Doctor Who voice actor. And there were only 4 stories in this series, if I'm not mistaken. And one of them took place in between the, I guess, Doctor Who movie. And I mean, ignoring the Doctor Who movie, it took place in between the time of the Day of the Doctor, the regeneration scene we see at the end with John Hurt and Rose. There's also the Ninth Doctor Adventures, which started in 2021. And it already has, I believe it's 5 full 3-episode series. Actually, I think it's 6 at this point. Either way, there are 21 stories of the Ninth Doctor, this time actually voiced by Christopher Eccleston. He did come back to Doctor Who. The way he left, I don't blame him for not coming back for a long time, because he was not treated right.
Although I should say, I don't think even now we know really all the details about that.
Probably don't know all the details, but I believe we know enough to conclude that he just wasn't treated right. And he was certainly, in his point of view, he was mistreated and basically blackballed by the BBC. And they basically lied about why he left, which hurt his job opportunities in acting for a long time. So it's unfortunate that that's just part of history. But he did come back to Big Finish at least, and he's recorded a lot of stuff, and I look forward to those. Again, these 6 series from the Ninth Doctor Adventures, they all take place in between the War Doctor and Rose, which is really impressive because, I mean, Billie Piper was, as far as I know, just a huge actress, and she also has her own series, a Rose Taylor audio series. So she does do Big Finish. I'm sure eventually they're probably going to do some stuff together. I would assume that's the plan. They're just working up towards it, I suppose. But they do a ton of things at Big Finish. They could walk up to really anything, and it would make sense.
Yeah, but the way she runs into Clive, who James has mentioned before, is sort of interesting. So, of course, the Rose and the Doctor have a discussion. The Doctor tries to explain about the invasion. Rose, of course, being just an average day British individual.
Did they give her age? I assume she's like 19. But I don't remember actually.
She's pretty young. I mean, maybe a little past 20. I'm not sure. We do know that she did not go on to A levels, which I would imagine is equivalent to college or university in the UK. Yeah, that's one thing I should say. Since James and I are both Americans, there are sometimes the occasional British terminology that we may not be familiar with.
Which is great because the Doctor Who is it's a British TV show. I would never want it to be Americanized.
Although Disney Plus, let's get ready, guys.
I don't think Disney Plus is going to be as bad as. I hate the fact that it's going to be just streaming online. I despise that, but I don't think it's going to change the content of the show.
But Disney Plus and the atrocity of them aside, I do think it's an interesting cultural osmosis thing. Of course, because watching this episode, being like only 11 or 12 episodes, seeing just, London, overall, like double-decker buses. We don't have double-decker buses. They look cool. They look fun. I imagine they're just as awful as any public transportation. Oh, actually, probably in the UK, public transportation is much nicer than what we generally have here.
But to be fair, though, I mean, where we live, we just don't have public transportation, so any would be nice. But
yeah, we live in a pretty rural area of Indiana, so we do live close to the second largest city in Indiana, but that's like being the second largest hot dog stand in China. I have no idea if that's a good comparison, but yeah, it's Indiana. It's not much. It's cornbras. But my main point being, after Rose speaks with the doctor, she doesn't really believe a lot of what he has to say. But of course, after those encounters, she is interested. So she goes over to her boyfriend's place.
I mean, she would be interested. She was attacked by a living arm that flew at her.
Yeah, I mean, of course she would be interested. But she doesn't have a computer. Apparently, Jackie doesn't have a computer either. So she goes over to her boyfriend's place to use his computer. Don't look at Mickey's emails, though. It's important. But
I wonder if they're going to try to do something with that, and they just didn't. Build up some mystery with Mickey. It just seems. I love the delivery of the line. Look at my emails, because it sounds so like the look on his face when he says it. I don't know what they were possibly doing with it. But
what could you possibly do with emails back in 2005? I have no idea. Maybe he was involved in some Ponzi scheme. But anyhow, she goes to Mickey's place to use his computer, and she goes to this generic search engine thing. It's yeah.
I believe it's literally made for TV. Since they can't sell Google, it's literally made for maybe not movies, because movies would have more money. But I think it's made for TV series, so they can source searching scenes, but without doing Google.
Yeah, I always hated that.
I believe it's called what, Searchwise?
Yeah, I'm not sure what it's called, but Rose literally, and maybe she just not have much experience with computers. I guess she grew up mainly in the 90s. Yeah, she would have grown up mainly in the 90s, and she just searches up doctor. And that's it. And apparently she is dismayed when she sees there's over 1.5 million results, because apparently she doesn't realize doctors is a profession someone can have.
Well, I mean, she didn't finish. She didn't get to her A level, so maybe, maybe she just didn't know.
Now she does eventually look up Dr. Blue Box.
I can't believe that worked either. But
well, I would be amazed if it didn't, because I mean, obviously in the classic series, I'm not exactly sure how many stories the Doctor was on Earth and how many times he was on Earth in present day, potentially saving people. That might actually be interesting to know. But there has to be some accounts of, maybe his work at UNIT would all be secretive. People know.
Not only would his work at UNIT be secretive, but the blue box would have been reported, because it would have not been involved. It would have just been in his science.
It would have been there. I mean, they would have known what it was. I'm assuming
I'm just thinking about surveillance, because UNIT people would be talking about it online.
Online, but I can imagine a UNIT soldier gets home. That's trained scientific advisor, though.
No, I get that. I'm just saying that the idea of the Doctor coming to save people and surveillance reporting about it, they would connect it with that guy. They might know that's the name of the Doctor, but it'll be reported. And there are many talks about the Doctor in the 70s, so maybe it was the 80s, because they love making references to the UNIT dating controversy. But there was no references of Blue Box during any of these conversations, so maybe it was a different person who took the name. They would say something like that, just because the TARDIS wasn't seen during any of those, events. That's all I mean.
Yeah, that is fair enough. So Rose runs into a site. I think it's a site called Doctor Who. I know
who is. Yeah, it has not a very good name, but that's fine.
Yeah, run by Clive, who James mentioned earlier. And it just shows a somewhat atrocious picture of some guy who sort of looks like Christopher Eccleston saying, "Have you seen this man?" So Ross starts an email correspondence, and then of course goes to talk to Clive, which actually leads to one of the low-key funny scenes in the episode, where Ross is about to go talk to Clive, and Mickey's like, "Oh, he might be a murderer," and he's just sitting in the car trying to look tough.
Yeah, and Rose goes to the door and she's like, "Oh, just to warn you, my boyfriend's in the car to make sure you're not going to kill me." And then Clive looks over at Mickey. Mickey has this tough guy look on his face, and Clive just kind of waves at him and looks out cheerful.
Yeah,
and apparently, I didn't know this until a couple of days ago. The actor who plays Clive actually comes back in that Ava mentioned Rose series, which it takes place on the alternate parallel Earth where Clive is alive. And so the actor comes back. I don't know how they got him back, but I guess it's what we were saying earlier. If you want to do Doctor Who stuff and they want you back, you're going to do it. So
yeah, and it's also worth mentioning just a small thing, that the individual who played Clive was a guy named Mark Bunton, who also previously appeared in another production by Russell T Davies. So it's sort of nice that he's bringing people like that back. And
actually, so did Christopher Eccleston.
Oh, yeah. Then naturally.
Same production.
being, of course, the second coming, was it?
I believe it's the second coming, yes.
So I do like that. And I think Clive is actually an interesting character. Now, we don't really see that much of him, but he has like pictures of this mysterious man named the Doctor. And he suggests that it seems like it's a title passed down from father to son. And he has pictures of more than just Eccleston, but in the episode, we only see the Eccleston Doctor. What's interesting is that would have been a good opportunity to show, previous Doctors, maybe just a quick drawing of Tom Baker, or maybe like a sketch of perhaps Colin Baker. Or actually, for Colin Baker, you might want a nice, colorful painting. But it would have been a good opportunity to show that. No, I can understand why they didn't. It actually took them a little bit to fully, I don't want to say fully cement the previous series, a classic Who, into it. I mean, by School Reunion.
But yeah, by School Reunion, we knew that it wasn't, just a soft reboot. I mean, I guess you could say soft reboot, but it wasn't a reboot. It was just the continuation of the Doctor stories, because of course, School Reunion, Sarah Jane comes back.
And it took them quite a little bit to actually, I think, in totality, show previous Doctors. The first, I mean, they showed a few sketches in, I believe, Human Nature, Family of Blood, in the Doctor's journal.
Technically in John Smith's journal, but yes.
Yeah, technically in John Smith's.
And then, I don't know how much you recall about it, but in the next Doctor, we get some holographic images of the Doctor.
Yeah, actually, the next Doctor's one, I think, I may have only seen once or twice. So that's one I'm actually interested in. Actually, a lot of those spazos. By a lot, I mean the next Doctor on Planet of the Dead. I think I've only seen once or twice.
I mean, you haven't even seen the Waters of Mars that many times, have you?
No, but at least I know about it. So that shows my...
That's just how it.
Indeed. That's what I ask for. So that would have been a good opportunity to show previous Doctors, which I think the first time they really do it is the 11th hour, which is...
Yeah, but they go like in detail, actually lingering on the idea.
Which is a fantastic scene toward the end of the episode, where Matt Smith comes into his own as the Doctor. And hey, we're almost there. So that would have been a good opportunity for Clive to show previous Doctors, but it makes sense when you're doing a pilot episode, trying to reach out to a new audience. You don't want to bog them down with too many details from the classic series. Because, I mean, of course, this season also brings back Unit a bit down the line.
I mean, they appear, but it's not like they don't really do anything with Unit, the Revival series, until season 4 of the Revival.
Yeah, so it makes a sense to sort of slowly reintroduce elements from the classic series into it. Of course, classic antagonists. Like we said, the Outons have appeared before, but they're not really... One are not referenced as Outons, unless, you look at the credits. And the Doctor doesn't say, oh, they were on Earth a couple of times before. I mean, he could have said, dropped a line like that, which he doesn't. I mean, it makes sense. I'm not saying he should have, but he could have.
Yeah, he could have, and I don't think I'd have been too out of place. I've saved these pieces from these people a couple of times before. You didn't notice it then. That would be, I guess you can't say you didn't notice it then, because Terror of the Outons was pretty noticeable. I admittedly have only seen that serial once, but I remember it being noticeable. Maybe it was as noticeable as I remember.
I have to imagine a lot of the stuff from Classic who just got covered up by Unit.
Yeah, Unit had, I'm sure Unit's job was full during the 70s or the 80s, trying to cover up all of these invasions.
So yeah, but Clive, I think Clive is a pretty interesting character. Of course, Rose, after the conversation, when Clive says, I think he's out the same man, I think he's an alien, wherever the Doctor is, death follows.
Yeah,
dramatic.
Bit over dramatic, but
hey, I'm pro Clive. He's a nice guy.
Clive was a nice guy, had a family, had a son who saw his father whole finally killed. By the way, I don't know if you have seen this. According to official BBC, I don't know if it's the novelization, but I know I've seen it at least once, that according to something, the only person who died in the entire Auton uprising that lasted for, 10 minutes, only person who died, amazingly, was Clive. No one else apparently died.
That is amazing, because, I mean, it's about, 8-10 minutes of the Outons, I mean, who have, again, they have a gun in their hand, they can shoot people. I mean, Jackie was close to dying. If Jackie had died, she would have been the second person of only two to die, so that would have been amazing.
That would have been horrifying for Rose.
I know, it's funny, because it's not the Doctor who brings death, it's Rose.
The Doctor never met Clive. Rose did.
So. Yeah. So that would have been darkly amusing. And if Mickey had died too. And speaking of Mickey, while Rose is having this conversation with Clive, Mickey gets replaced by a plastic copy. And the reason is because the Nasty Consciousness is trying to gauge exactly what the Doctor is doing. I'm assuming trying to find the Doctor to kill him.
Yeah, to stop him because they know that he's going to try to stop them. So it makes sense that the Nasty Consciousness is powered. And they knew that there was a connection with Rose because they had,
Matt tries to that point.
Yes. So they figured they might as well use Rose to get to the Doctor, which, again, it works, technically.
Yeah. Now, this plastic copy of Mickey, is it the most advanced?
No, the CGI is partially during the first 2 seasons of the revival.
It can be dicey at times.
It needed work. We said earlier in our intro that we don't mind special effects that aren't great, and that's true, but that's more when it's practical, special effects. When it's CGI,
this should maybe reach a little higher.
Yeah, and I guess I can't say that the out-and Mickey wasn't practical. I don't know, as it looked so obviously fake. Like, I get it, but I get that he's a plastic thing, but could they have just made it like what they did with Rory in the Big Bang? Like, he just make it look like Mickey, but we know that it's an out-and because we just have Mickey getting taken. I think that would have been great.
Yeah, and the fact, Rose, of course, was in her own world at the time, trying to go through her own stuff.
She was distracted. She was wondering if she should get pizza or Chinese. Who can blame her?
Pizza.
Maybe some Chinese.
Pizza.
I'm surprised they survived that drive.
That's another one. It's a quality exchange right there. Of course, naturally, we're not going scene for scene, even though we
have been.
So. Although we just discussed plenty of scenes, but that's not really the intent here. Like I said, we're just here having fun, guys. This is fun, right? Hashtag yes. Well, at least as fun as a nice low quality Doctor Who podcast can be. So I guess my final points on the episode, again, we mentioned the Doctor's personality a bit. He seems quite a bit, he seems angry, he seems somewhat bitter. Now, we don't find out the exact reasons for all of this until, I guess technically in the next episode we find out.
Technically we find out the very basics next episode about how there was a war.
Well, technically find out there was a war this episode.
Yeah, but we don't know how dramatic the extent of the war was until next episode.
Although we do know, there's a great line by the Doctor as he's trying to talk to the Nasty Consciousness. The Nasty Consciousness finds out that he's a Time Lord, and it gets quite angry with him, leading the Doctor to, exclaim, I couldn't save your planet, I couldn't save any of them, in probably one of the more emotional scenes from the Doctor in the episode. And it shows, whatever the war entailed, it was obviously traumatic, and it involved at least more than 2 or 3 planets. So that does show a mild extent to the war, which I have to imagine brought a lot of people who watch Classic Who. A lot of people had watching that hey, that's interesting. What's going on with this war thing?
Yeah, it would have been really great to be a Classic fan, slowly piece together information that we learn about this war. We had last seen the Time Lords, in I guess the 5 Doctors. Yeah, because they did it Sorbonini's 6th Doctor story and they did it Sorbonini's 7th Doctor story. I would have loved to see a Time Lord with the 7th Doctor.
God, Time Lords would have hated him, though.
Oh, yes, but they would have... Oh, I'm sorry. What am I thinking? 6th Doctor, Trial for Time Lord. I actually like this season. Mostly. So, yeah. So last time we saw the Time Lords in the classic series was Trial of a Time Lord. And then we get this 9th Doctor, not looking anything like a Doctor we've seen before. Just out in black, basically. Screaming about some war. I'm sure people are going, wait, what are the Time Lords? What's happening right now? I know they've just been fascinating to follow along. Of course, this is without any Big Finish information. Which, granted, would have spoiled anything anyway. But I guess people would have seen the Time Lords if they had listened to those as well.
And I think also worth mentioning during the conversation with the Nasty Consciousness, the Doctor does drop the name the Shadow Proclamation, which does it. It's not really until season 4 he keeps throughout that title comes up a couple of times here and there, and we actually do see the Shadow Proclamation toward the end of season 4, which I think is nice.
Yeah, it's just a nice small bit of world building. I'm wondering if perhaps it's an organization that founded in the
absence of the Time Lords.
Yeah, I kind of wonder about it. It might be something like that. I'm sure that there's a bit of lore that contradicts that. This is just me thinking off the top of my head. But it makes sense. The Time Lords tap. I don't know how the Time Lords past last had any effect on how the people win their thing, which literally had an invention. But
that's not what the division says.
Yeah, it's not what the CIA say either. But it's fine. It's whatever. I'm sure they had their ways. They only, were society for, a billion years. But that's, all fine. But so I've always just thought that about the Silent Proclamation. I think it's a nice fun bit of world building. I like how they actually do eventually lead somewhere with it.
Yeah, and I just think the whole thing with the Doctor's personality, it feels quite a bit different than previous Doctors. Although I think he has some similarities to the eventual Peter Capaldi Doctor, somewhat rough around the edges. No, it doesn't take long. I just think it takes time for Christopher Eccleston to sort of warm up to humanity.
I mean, he certainly warms up to Rose quick enough, perhaps too quickly for some fans, but
yeah, and Capaldi was probably more standoffish throughout a lot of his run. But they're both a little more, I don't know, touchy, which I think is always sort of an interesting personality for the Doctor to have. And I actually do think it's more interesting the whole like brand of everyone that Peter Davison sort of displayed.
Well, yeah, that's true. I don't know. It depends on how you want to play it. You could do a lot with the Doctor's personality. I mean, they've been around for a very long time.
And it's a good point too, because that's one of the reasons I actually think the whole regeneration thing. I mean, not only is it clever to keep the show going, but you can have the same character with different personalities. And, having a character with different personalities in the previous one, I think just keeps the show fresh.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I mean, they worked with what they had. They had to, deal with the Huntner situation. So they came up with an amazing concept. And that's why Doctor Who is still going on today. And why Doctor Who, at this point, could basically go on, on and off. It could go on forever. Not many forms of media can do that.
Yeah, so that is nice.
Like canonically in story, in universe, not many series can do that.
Indeed. So I mean, this first episode is a bit rough at places. Some of the humor isn't exactly my type of humor. Some of the CGI doesn't look that great. But again, it's like the revival episode, or the first episode of the revival, just trying to bring this back. And my understanding, a lot of the budget actually went to the second episode.
Yes, I believe that like almost destroyed the budget of the rest of the season,
which is amusing. But I mean, honestly, this first episode does what it needs to do. It brings in a companion who, to this day, Rose is a very popular companion, and I think Billie Piper is a really good actress. And just it's a pretty fast-paced, moving story, changing the format to like a single episode, 45 minutes, as opposed to a serialized 4 episodes of 22 minutes. It makes sense for the modern day, because trying to replicate what they did in the 70s and 80s, I have to imagine, would it work for a lot of people? At least, let me rephrase, it might work for British audiences because that might be what they're used to. But then trying to get a bunch of viewership from other countries, like the USA, I don't know if it would really work with the audiences, what we come to expect from TV.
Yeah, I mean, we might have had that like with serializations on the radio back in, in the 30s and 40s, but certainly by modern day TV standards, I can't think, like maybe webcasts would do that, but I can't think of actual, TV that had, it got sitcoms. When do sitcoms, is it once a week for sitcoms? I guess Doctor Who can't, pretend to be a sitcom. So I guess they just had to get with the times, which I don't really like. I do prefer these serializations, but I do have to say that there was a lot of padding in some of them.
Yeah, if you've ever seen a John Potter's story, you ever seen Doctor Who at its most drawn out? I know technically the War Games was a longer story than any John Potter's story, but and I guess some people say the War Games was over long. I remember enjoying the War Games. Now, I think I've only seen it maybe twice or 3 times, so maybe it's worse than what I remember.
I just think Charlton's a fun Doctor. So even if it's being drawn out, if Charlton's involved, I tend to like it.
Yeah, but I remember enjoying the War Games, quite a bit more than something like, I don't know, The Mind of Evil, which is a John Pottery story, which is, I think, only 6 episodes.
Yeah, that's only 6.
But just felt longer. So, I mean, I can understand why changing the format is probably a good idea to reach a wider audience. And like I said, this first episode isn't amazing. It's not like the best return to form we've ever seen, but for reintroducing the Doctor, I think it does a pretty decent job.
Yeah, it's a nice way to do it. It's quick paced. It's mostly action based. We get some snips of stories, some hints of what's happened in the past, and that's going to be continued on throughout the season and the series.
Now, naturally, this is a podcast of quality form. So I think if you've listened to our previous podcast, we talked about The Science of Time, which is the first big Finnish Doctor Who release, if you discount the Beneath Summerfield ones.
And we don't discount them, we just don't know the character yet.
Yes, and we, toward the end of that, discussed exactly where that would take place. in each of the Doctor's chronology, the post-note timeline. And we thought it might be fun to do that with each story we talk about.
Yeah, like as a continuing segment. Again, this is all information from the TARDIS wiki. They have 30 timelines for the Doctors, the post-note timelines. So as we were saying earlier, that even though the Doctor looks at himself in the mirror and makes a statement about his heirs, he's had already 21 audio stories, actually 22 audio stories that take place before this one, and also multiple source stories. So, and one of the source stories actually takes place right before Rose, which is called the Patchwork Parole, which appears in the Doctor Who anthology book Tales of Terror, which was a 2017 collection of Halloween short stories. I usually wouldn't mention short stories in this segment because a short story could come from anywhere, but this one is one that we actually happen to own this book. Neither of us have read it or any of the stories, I don't believe, but since we actually own it, I thought it's worth mentioning in this segment. Ignoring that, he last appeared in his own personal timeline in the Series 2, 9th Doctor, 3rd Anthology, if you can follow all the numbers I just said, in the audio story Flat Pack, which came out actually just November. Hey, that's great. November 23rd. And I believe that's the anniversary. Yeah, that should be the Doctor Who anniversary. And November 23rd of 2022, so just a little over a month ago was when that came out. Well, I guess it's the newest 9th Doctor audio story, and it's actually the story that takes place chronologically before Rose. And very interesting fact, at the end of this episode, we see the Doctor offer Rose to be his companion, ask him to travel through, such that the TARDIS can travel through space, and Rose says no, she needs to take care of this useless lamp, talking about Mickey, which makes sense considering. And the Doctor says, oh, okay, then he just gets up in his TARDIS and he goes. And then, of course, he comes back. But in between that space, because Doctor Who's going to Doctor Who, there's a whole short story that takes place in between that called The Beast of Babylon. It's just a quick adventure. I don't know how quick it is. I've never read it. That the 9th Doctor goes on in between the time, that Rose, said no, and then him coming back to get Rose. And I just think it's interesting that they fit, an entire story between, those two segments.
And it's also worth mentioning that the Doctor offers, hey, you can travel with me. Rose declines. And then he leaves and he comes back. Oh, did I mention it also travels in time? And then in one of the sort of corny, but it's like a slow motion Rose running into
corny, yeah, where she's running towards the TARDIS, and then I forget, does it end in a freeze frame or does it just
no, she's just running to the TARDIS, but it's sort of corny looking. I mean, but again, this is the first episode of the Revival, so
yeah, I mean, it would be. Could you imagine being given the chance to travel through all this space and time? Now, I'm not sure I'd actually take it, to be honest. Yeah, you'll be excited about that. I'd probably run towards TARDIS. Maybe not run or walk, but I don't run places. It's not really my groove. But I mean, certainly I could see somebody being excited about that, especially if all your life you've just been, you've been a working person. You've been doing menial jobs, getting paid minimum wage, and just going through life, living in a flat. And I'm sure that if you have a sense of excitement that Rose obviously has, that would appeal to you.
So, while not a necessarily amazing episode, I think it's a pretty decent reintroduction to the Doctor, to the universe, to the story. Any last words on that for you, James?
Not really. I think the special effects are going to turn people off if they want to. If somebody wants to get into Doctor Who and they watch this and they, are young, born in 2003 or something like that. I guess maybe even somebody born in 2003 now would be like Shanti. But if they're young and they want to get into modern Doctor Who and this is where they start, I'm assuming some people are going to have problems with the special effects. But I think it's not so much in classic, not so much in NuWho, but in classic Who, the special effects were part of the charm. So I give leeway to not great effects in modern Who for the first couple of seasons, just because the story usually matters more than how bad something might look. And again, this is an introduction episode. It probably would have been better to spend a bit more money on this one, just because it was the first one. You need good first impressions. But apparently it worked enough, and Doctor Who has been going kind of since 2005. And we have Christopher Eccleston to thank for that. So yeah, don't think it's an amazing episode. I wish they'd used the word outhands. I wish that we had seen a couple of pictures of previous Doctors, but they didn't ask me. So overall, I think it's it's a good episode. It does what it needed to do, and it worked for the time.
Indeed. And I guess 2 final notes before we finish this off. I also want to mention that in the previous episode we did talking about the Signs of Time, I neglected to mention that it was written by Nicholas Briggs. I always try to give I always want to try to give credit to the writers of each story we cover. So Nicholas Briggs is an individual who wrote the Signs of Time, and I will make sure from now on to make sure I cover that part. And then I also want to, I guess, give a little, preview of what we have coming up next, just to, I guess, entice people to this wonderful podcast. So up next, we will cover the second Big Finish production, being Phantasmagoria.
Yes, this one, the second of the main reigns, stars the 5th Doctor with Mark Strickson as Torlo, which we listened to, we finished about a week ago, and, well, I think both of us quite liked, so I think that will be a fun discussion, Michael.
Indeed. So that has been our discussion on Rose. Good times. We are the Brothers Mahoney. I am Michael.
And I am James.
And we hope that you enjoyed listening. We will see you later.